Okay, now let's go on to the next slide. Okay, now here comes the question. Well, Uzziah, how do I know that that's true? How do I know that if I don't count the full moon at the beginning of March, that I would still be able to get the right Passover day? Well, when we read about the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right, which is right at the Passover, we read about a certain offering that had to be brought forth. This offering is an indicator to you on what time of the season it is. Let's read this, Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 9.
The book of Leviticus chapter 23, verse 9. And the Lord spake unto Moses,
Uzziah spoke unto Moses?
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying,
Okay.
Speak unto the children of Israel.
That's us.
And say unto them, when ye come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof.
Okay, now I'm starting to think now, and I'm going to reap the harvest thereof during this time. Go ahead.
Then ye shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest.
Now, what's a sheaf? A sheaf, by definition, is a bundle of grain, okay, laid lengthwise and tied together after reaping. Okay, so you have an entire bundle now of barley that you've gotten out of the field as it was written in the scriptures, and you got so much of it that you're able to bring it to the priest so that way they could make a wave offering or sheaf offering. Now, that sounds kind of funny to me. I don't know if it's clicking just yet. I know a lot of y'all are still learning, but we're going to go into that in a second. When we read in the next verse, it says this. We was at verse 11.
Yes.
Let's read that.
Verse 11. And he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord.
So this big bundle, right? This bundle of barley, this bundle of grain that you have, you're able to take all of this up, bring it before the priest. The priest is going to wave it to show your obedience to God. And this all goes along with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This was what the law was under the time of Moses, okay? The reason why I'm bringing this out is because even though we are now in Christ, wherein there are certain offerings that no longer take place because he is the offering, he is the ultimate sacrifice, it's still important to know these things because these gives us context clues about when the Passover happened. Passover happened during a time in spring where there was enough barley developed and ripe that you could take it, bundle it up, and bring it before the priest for a wave offering. Let's go to the next one, Yakin, because I got questions. Here's the question. How the hell can you honor this feast day if you're keeping it 1 or 2 days after the spring has begun?
You got to take the little bitty bud that of something that has come up and make the biggest sheep you can out of it, right?
I mean, how can you do it? Okay, so let's put ourselves in this frame of thought, right? Again, our forefathers don't have almanacs. Our forefathers don't have Google. They have to be able to visibly go out and see a time of the year in which everything is green. Now, you know me, I'm not much of a betting man, but there's certain months, if I had to guarantee whether or not it was all green during that time, there's certain months I wouldn't bet on, because in certain parts of the year, oh man, that winter can stay cold for a long time. That's the reason why we have seasons for these high holy days. Because if you are not keeping a bib in the spring, and if you're not keeping the Passover 14 days from the beginning of a bib in the spring, How are you going to have produce that you can bring before the priest to wave the sheaf for a wave offering? If spring just started for you 2 days ago, you ain't got nothing coming out of your field. you ain't not got no kernels and green ears of corn that you're able to bring forth to the temple. There's no way that you could do that. Foolishness. There's no way when you look in these scriptures that you could get out of that, okay, start celebrating Passover as soon as I hear, okay, spring equinox is today, bam, tomorrow's the Passover.
Yep.
So where's the barley going to come from then? Where's the barley? Where all of your greenery? You're not even really in the peak of the spring, obviously, but you're definitely not at a point of the spring where you're able to bring forth something of the harvest. Let me go back to that in Leviticus 23. Y'all got to see these verses. This is the Bible talking. When you read in Leviticus chapter 23, you had something? Somebody had something?
Yeah. So, again, dealing with the research, when you even look at... Again, dealing with the research, when you even look at barley, it says that once barley is planted in the ground, it takes the process about 14 days for it to even grow 8 inches in height. So pretty much that just means that you cannot be able to hold, cannot be able to proclaim the first month literally 2 days after the, 2 days after the month of Abib. It just wouldn't work because it needs process for the plants to grow.
Correct. Yeah. And as we all know, not even being farmers ourselves, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist in order to know that whenever you're dealing with agriculture, is something that happens over time. You don't get a harvest out of anything starting from day one. It has to be an evolutionary process in order for your crops to be able to produce and grow. You had something, Shama?
Yeah, and even when you go back to the plagues in Egypt that the Most High smit the Egyptians with, when you go to Exodus, the 9th chapter and the 31st verse, well, in this chapter it's talking about the hail, it says, and the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in ear, and the flax boiled. Barley, that means it was budding. Verse 32, but the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. But if you know anything about wheat and rye, they grow up later in the season.
Correct.
All right, so that's when I pulled in Wisdom of Solomon. You got to start knowing about the plants and things of that nature to help you understand.
Excellent. Perfect. All praises. The Spirit is on you, brothers. I thought you brothers were celebrating Christmas a couple weeks ago. How the hell y'all know all of this? And just a couple days ago, you was watching the ball drop. Come on, man. The scriptures say what they say. When you read in Leviticus, the 23rd chapter, right, it tells you that it has to be a harvest coming out of the land. Let's read Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 10.
Leviticus chapter 23, verse 10. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when ye be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then ye shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest unto the priest.
Now this happened during the time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So this is letting us know that based upon seasons, when we celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread, surely there should be enough greenery in our midst so that if we had to bring forth an offering, which we don't because we're under Christ, is letting us know what time frame that should be. So brothers shouldn't be in the mentality of, oh, I could celebrate the Passover in December. Oh, really? So how would you bring forth this sheaf offering if you was back in the ancient world? How would you do it if you were in the dead of winter? This makes no sense. We have to align everything according to the scriptures. Okay? Next slide. Okay, just got to remind y'all on that. Again, here's the question. How can you have a harvest of barley a few days after the beginning of spring? Not started. How can you have a harvest of it a few days after the beginning of spring? Let's go on to the next slide. Inquiring minds want to know that, by the way. But we need to read this verse. This is Exodus chapter 23 and verse 15. Exodus chapter 23 and verse 15. The reason why I'm going into this, the brothers are going into this, is because those of you that are fellowshipping with us ought not to look at other calendars wherein high holy days are being observed out of season. According to the scriptures, if we're still of the mindset that sin is transgression of the law, to keep these feast days outside of its seasons is sin according to the scriptures. That's right. But that's as if we're being biblically accurate. Back now, Exodus chapter 23 and verse 15.
Exodus chapter 23, verse 15.
Come on.
Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread.
You see that? Talking about the feast of unleavened bread. Read.
Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days.
Come on.
As I commanded thee, in the time appointed of the month Abib.
Come on.
For in it thou comest out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty.
Wait, I want to hear that part again, because I thought that if I'm celebrating the Passover in the winter, or day one, I have no greenery in my midst? Don't you know I don't have no green ears of corn around me? Why are you commanding that none out of Israel comes before the Lord empty? So wait a minute. If none of Israel will come before the Lord empty, that must have been, there was so much greenery. Yeah. You had greenery to throw around.
Abundant.
Can you imagine that? Here it is. We got a law that we're reading in the scriptures where it says, none of y'all got to come before me empty. Surely it couldn't have been one or two pieces of grain that the scriptures are talking about. Surely the Lord wouldn't have laid such a yoke on us that we weren't able to bear. This is letting you know again by indication that there was a surplus of vegetation in our midst when we kept the Feast of Unleavened Bread. If that's not the case for you when you're keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread, chances are you might be keeping it on the wrong day. Let's read that again.
Verse 16. And the Feast of Harvest.
Verse 15, please.
Verse 15.
Uh-huh.
Exodus 23, verse 15.
Uh-huh.
Thou shalt keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Uh-huh.
Thou shalt eat unleavened bread 7 days.
Come on.
As I commanded thee.
Come on.
In the time appointed of the month Abib.
Come on.
For in it thou camest out from Egypt.
In the month of Abib thou camest out from Egypt. And Shammah had already proven to you, going back in Exodus, when all of that was happening, you already had grains that were developed. You already had things going on in the spring. Go ahead.
And none shall appear before me empty.
None. There's going to be so much vegetation that's going to be in your midst during this time of the season. For you to not give of the surplus that was given to you, you got the devil on you. It's so plentiful in the earth. For you to not bring it forth, you're erring against the scriptures. So what is this talking about? This is telling us there's a certain window of time within the spring that this is referring to. See, again, a lot of us in just kind of going with the flow, which can be so easy to do if you're not studying the scriptures yourself, seeking your own salvation with fear and trembling. It could be easy for somebody to tell you, well, hey, we still are technically keeping the Passover in the spring, but the scriptures are showing you when you go into the detail of it, it's not even just about the season in general. It's a specific window of time within this season in order to be able to apply these verses. Go ahead. You had something, Roy? Okay, well then let's move forward. Now, I'm sorry, before I can't get off the screen because we got another bit of evidence for y'all. Now again, everything that you see here, Google the exact words, see if the same thing don't pop up for you. We have here a Google where we're asking, when does barley grow in Palestine? Now, for many of you in the Israelite community that have been around for a bit, you're already fully aware that the land of Palestine belonged to us before Israel was divided in our captivity. Okay? Many of the different landmarks in what's known in the modern day as Palestine are very prominent places wherein our forefathers dwell. Okay? Now, considering this, our forefathers, right? We are the children of Israel. It might be a good rule to think, just a guess, okay, well, if we were in Israel, let's just say, right? Mm-hmm. When would we expect to be able to apply the Feast of Unleavened Bread then? When would we expect to start counting the days? We looked up. When does barley grow in Palestine? It says, what time of year is barley harvested? Barley harvest is usually in April and May. I want you to see that. It says barley harvest. Remember, because you're supposed to be taking a bundle of that and bringing it before the priest so that way he could do the sheaf offering. Mm-hmm. This is telling you right here, you can't do anything in bringing something before the priest if you haven't even reached the harvest season yet. How can you be celebrating this holiday wherein one of the ordinances to bring forth the sheaf offering and you haven't even gotten to the time of the barley harvest yet? Go ahead.
Just to go back to your point about the sacrifices that we had to bring forth, even when you think about the animals, right. When you think about a sheep or a goat, they are born at specific times. There's sometimes sheep will have babies in late wintertime, and then other times they'll have babies in the springtime, right? When you read in Exodus chapter 13, starting from verse 1, it says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whichsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel. Both man and of beast, it is mine." All right. And Moses said unto the people, "Remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of the hand of the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall no unleavened bread be eaten. This day came you out in the month of Abib." So I just went there to show that even when you think about, okay, you could say, okay, say you had some lamb that were born in early winter. You had to, the time was very specific because you had to offer a lamb of the first year without blemish. So it had to be very specific. You couldn't just be like, oh, yeah, we got lamb from back in the day. You had to be very specific because if you didn't have those in the winter, you were going to, or you had those from the spring, it would mess you up if they went over a year. Right. So you got to be very specific.
Then it wouldn't be considered a lamb. Mm-hmm. You know, I really think this is very important that we're speaking on this. You know, Romans 15:4 says everything was written aforetime for our learning, right? And as you bring up, Uzziah, about the harvest in Palestine or in our ancient lands, mm-hmm. that's important because the Lord has given all this documentation and is based off of that location. Mm-hmm. You know, so you're going to have a lot of people who now being scattered across the four corners of this earth are living in places that might be, you know, in the Arctic winter look like all year round, right? Mm-hmm. Like Alaska or something, right? Mm-hmm. But you still have your reference and understanding because you've learned from the things that have been documented here about things that may not be relative to the location that you're in, correct, but is relative to the learning, the history of our forefathers.
Correct. All praises. Excellent point. Yes, that is something good to note. You know, we're also, like, whenever we look at these different references, like when we're talking about the spring equinox and things like that, you'll see even when they give you those analysis, it'll separate it by hemispheres, okay? So now let's go on to the next. So we read in the book of Exodus, the Lord commanded us that when we celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread and when we had to give of that sheaf offering, none of us could come empty. So it's obvious that there was enough greenery and enough growth at that time of the season in order for us to be able to apply that scripture.